That's what I consider EMDR. It's a much expedited treatment to get a person to a point where they can really access those unprocessed memories to really receive the ultimate healing they so deserve.
From To Be Magnetic, this is the Expanded Podcast with your host, Lacy Phillips. As the leading destination for neural manifestation, we dispel the woo-woo in order to help you create real, tangible results based on neuroplasticity, psychology, epigenetics, and energetics. Our goal is to normalize the practice of manifestation and empower you to get into the driver's seat of your life in order to manifest the experiences, relationships, and things that most align with your authenticity. Part of our manifestation process entails expanding past your limiting subconscious beliefs. Therefore, by tuning into this podcast with interviews from experts, thought leaders, spiritual teachers, scientists, and those with neural manifestation success stories, you're starting the process of expanding your subconscious in order to see to believe that anything you desire is possible. And by pressing play, the process begins.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Expanded. Before we jump into the episode today, it's going to be a really good one because we have Lacy's therapist on. I wanted to thank everyone for the magical event we had this past weekend, meeting everyone for our first official magnetic meetup. It was so incredible to connect with community. I just felt so grateful and blessed to speak with all of you, put faces to your DMs, and really talk to you guys about this process and the unblocking. This magnetic meetup was focused all around finding the missing piece. So you need either unblocking, aligned action, or expansion, and have all of those things working in tandem in order to manifest. And this kind of live workshop, basically, that we had this past weekend really helped people get to the root of what that missing piece is so they know what steps to take in order to fully get in alignment with their manifestation. Don't worry, we're going to have more of these events coming up. If you feel like you missed out and wanted to learn more about the missing piece, we have a digital workshop that will be released on April 12th, where Lacy and I will cover a lot of the similar teachings of finding the missing piece. You will also have access to a brand new custom deep imagining, as well as brand new journal prompts. This is something exclusive for this specific teaching outside of the pathway. So it is for purchase for $65 for the early bird. And then after April, the price will go back to full price. So be sure to snag that now if you are interested. And if you have any questions, feel free to DM me or the team to learn more. I also wanted to thank our event sponsors, especially Sun and Swell. They are such an incredible company, which I just learned about from doing this event. They're a zero-waste health food brand with a wide variety of products, completely women-owned. They sell organic food and different snacks and pantry staples. And what's really, really cool about what they do is they're combining not only offering organic foods such as dates, cashews, energy bites, dried fruits, nuts, seeds, all sorts of pantry staples, coconut oil, sugar, nut flours, etc. But they're doing it in a completely zero waste way where all of their packaging is 100% compostable. One of the biggest ways that we waste plastic is by these single serve packaged foods where we just open them up and throw them away, piling up the plastics. And I believe it takes over 400 years for some of these packages to completely compost, whereas their packaging is 100% compostable. You can put it right into your garbage compost or find one in the area. You can even do a send your bags back program where you send it to their company and they will compost it for you. So sustainable, also really delicious foods and things that you'll just want to have saved in your pantry forever. So they are actually offering a very generous discount code on their products for 25% off your first order. Use code TBM. For Sun and Swell, you will not regret both the food and the impact on the environment with purchasing through them. Thank you again, Sun and Swell. So in today's episode, we have a really fun Explain Today where we are joined by Lacy's therapist, Katie LaRue, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist who is certified in EMDR therapy. She's also a certified mindfulness meditation practitioner, a certified yoga instructor. She has a master's degree in counseling and is an advocate for psychedelic therapeutic treatment. Katie really is such an incredible therapist and facilitator. She has been in practice for over 10 years and is really an expert on trauma, PTSD, and tons of other things covering the spectrum. One of the things that Lacy really loves about Katie is the fact that even though she's so accredited and has quite the laundry list of certifications, she's also someone who's really heart-centered and able to tap into a very intuitive way of healing. So today, Katie is joining us to really cover what happens with trauma in the body and how people can utilize a methodology that she's trained in, EMDR, to help move through and heal it, and how that experience has been for Lacy. So Lacy talks about using the TBM unblocking work in conjunction with therapy and EMDR to take that unblocking to a whole nother level. And Katie also really explains for us what happens when people face a traumatic situation, what defines trauma, and how does that trauma lead to blocks that may be preventing us in our manifestation work, and how to start to go and peel that back and peel back the layers and uncover our full, worthy, authentic self. So I know you guys are going to love this episode. We are even having a part 2 with Katie where we're going to dive into how Lacy is also supplementing microdosing along with this process. You guys are going to love that one. It will be coming out next month, but I know you're going to get so much out of this one. And if you're looking to connect with Katie for your own counseling or therapy or EMDR work, make sure to check out her website in the show notes or connect with her through her Instagram at Katie_LaRue_OHC. You can also find that in the show notes.
And now a word from our partners.
As you know, we are huge fans of Blue Blocks here at 2B Magnetic. I am constantly using their Lumi red lights, their blue light blocking glasses, their Lumi Sleep Plus light clip, and their Lumi Sleep Plus lights that I have on my bedside table. And now they are looking to biohack and protect us in even more ways by expanding what they offer at Blue Blocks. So I've talked about their M-Flow collection with their anti-radiation laptop mat, which I'm absolutely loving. But one thing I was waiting to use until I manifested my new phone, which finally came through after I did some deep, energetic unblocking work, was their EMF harmonizing sticker. So how this sticker works is our phones that we're on all day long are emitting positive ions, which can disrupt our bodies. They're not in our natural state and really give us the EMF radiation. So what this sticker does, very similar to the anti-radiation laptop mat, is it emits negative ions to balance out the positive ions that are coming out of whatever product you are putting the sticker on. So I saved it to use on my iPhone because I have it in my hands all the time. I'm checking Slack, checking emails, in text, on phone conversations, listening to podcast edits. I'm constantly on my phone. So any way that I can help block from any of the damaging effects from the radiation of the phone, I'm going to use. The EMF harmonizing sticker is one of the most affordable things they have at Blue Blocks. You just stick it on the back of your phone and it'll help protect you against some of the positive ions and EMFs coming off of your phone. They have a really cool unboxing video on YouTube, which we'll link in our show notes, but you can also use it to put on other big EMF releasing things in your home. Your dishwasher, you can put it on your computer, you can put it on your microwave, you can put it on your router for your internet. It's going to help mitigate some of the damage that's coming from all of those electrical devices. So if you want to get your EMF harmonizing sticker to put on your phone or any of your devices, you can do that with the special code MAGNETIC, all caps, MEGNETIC for 15% off. Again, that's MAGNETIC, MAGNETIC for 15% off. You can check out it on the Blue Blocks website or go to our podcast show notes or podcast essentials to click over and learn more about Blue Blocks products. One thing I am a huge fan of is protecting and helping to heal my gut. As someone who has had many gut imbalances in her life, having a really healthy gut really is the start of health for me because it is what sets everything else into balance. And so when it comes to my probiotics, I want to get the best in the business in order to support my gut at the maximum capacity. So I've looked no further than Seed Probiotics. We've been talking about them for such a long time because they really are top of the industry. They have the most science-backed research, the 2-in-1 capsule to make sure 100% of what you are taking in the probiotics actually reaches the gut compared to a lot of other probiotics where it gets broken down in the stomach acid and bile and never actually reaches the part of the gut or colon that it needs to go in order to support you. And one thing that I had been thinking about recently was this idea of rotating probiotics, getting different strains of probiotics at different times. Different companies have this idea and schedule. And Seed actually had a great share on their Instagram about this that helped break down why it was important to take your probiotics regularly. Probiotics are transient, meaning they go into the digestive tract and the colon and support that area. So they're interacting with your gut cells, your immune cells, your dietary nutrients, and all of the microbiota that is already in your digestive tract to help support all of them further. After they've done their job, they colonize that area and then they leave your system when they travel through your intestines and out of your body. So that means if you're rotating probiotics, you're not giving all of the strains that you try in that first batch its fair share because you need to continually take it. It's something you want to take on a regular basis. They're not permanently going to live in your system. So they're constantly moving in and out of your body. So the more regularly you take probiotics, the more effective they're going to be for your body. That's why I stick with Seed. I'm regular about taking it. And I did notice it was interesting when I went home over the holidays, I had left my jar of Seed at home and I was so disappointed in trying to get one on the go because even after not taking it for 4 or 5 days, I can tell my digestion immediately shifted and felt different because it wasn't getting that support from the Seed probiotic that I needed. And once I was back on, I was feeling incredible, far less bloated, ease of digestion, and everything was running a lot smoother. So if you're looking for a good probiotic, you're looking to boost your immune and overall health through supporting the gut microbiome, I highly suggest checking out Seed. We have a special code for our podcast community, TBM15, for 15% off your first month subscription with Seed. I promise you, you will not regret it. It is one of the best monthly subscriptions I have by far. Again, that code is TBM15 for 15% off. And you can check out the show notes for a link to the Seed website to purchase or on our podcast essentials page as well.
All right, on to the episode.
Today we have joining Lacy and I, Katie, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist who is trained in EMDR. Lacy has been working very closely with Katie on some of her own therapeutic techniques and really figuring out ways to take the deep imaginings even deeper and unblocking even deeper. So we're going to cover everything from EMDR. This is a highly requested episode and I'm so excited to dive in. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so jazzed to be here.
Yeah, so I like to kick off these explains with a little quote that kind of sets the stage. And I thought this one kind of made the most sense here. You are here to break long-held patterns, manifest your fulfilling life, and expand others to see that they can do the same. And so I think when it comes to EMDR work, the To Be Magnetic deep imagining work, microdosing, all of these things are tools to sort of pull back the layers and getting back into our true, authentic selves. So Lacy, why don't you actually kick us off and tell us how you started learning about EMDR and what sort of piqued your interest to use that as a tool to help unblock even further?
It's actually one of my first clients that I started working with around the time that I started working with our coach, Amanda Blair, back in the day. And she introduced me to EMDR. And she said, I think you're really going to love this based on the work you do, because I'll let you explain this more, Katie, once we get into it, but really talked about how trauma gets stuck in the body and how the founder of EMDR realized that the eyes freeze, et cetera. And it all made a lot of sense to me. And it was really profound. And I personally went into doing, I think, like 6 months of EMDR about a year after that. And I've always since suggested it side by side with our work. I think it's really, really effective. And what's been really interesting since working with Katie, I think we've been working together now a couple of months. And so far, working with you has been really tremendous. Not only do I think you're really talented and grounded, and though you have a title, I think you're absolutely really intuitive. So, the person who referred me to you knew that it would be the perfect match, because things I would say when I would work with other professionals was like, I would figure things out too quickly and it would get stale. And that's never been the case working with you. You're so intuitive, you know exactly where to go. And the EMDR, what I've realized since working together is what I can, see happening that kind of super speeds our process of manifestation is it really does the trick sooner to me. And not sooner than a DI, but what I feel like it does is a DI will get to the specific memory and start doing the things to help create the new neural pathways. But what EMDR does to me is it's like it sweeps up the cobwebs faster. So all of those little memory connections, it just starts to grab those faster. So I find this to be the best complement to this process and to this work. And I'm going to let you go ahead and start to introduce EMDR and what that is and how they both work.
Awesome. Thank you. And for the listeners who are like, what does EMDR stand for? Get ready for it. It's eye movement desensitization reprocessing. So it's quite the mouthful. But the American psychologist Francine Shapiro in the late 80s brought this treatment modality into the therapeutic setting because she was on a walk one day and she was noticing her eyes moving back and forth, looking at different things on the floor. And she started to realize the distressing memories she experienced were reduced. And so she thought, oh my God, I got to bring this into the therapeutic setting and see what we have here. And so she developed this psychotherapy treatment. And, I really like what you said, Lacy. I couldn't agree more. I kind of paint this picture of, how does a person want to get to their healing process? How do they want to get to the point where they're like really moving through those unprocessed memories? And so a person can, let's say, use an analogy, take a car to New York. Well, they're going to take the slow road. And that's totally fine. That's absolutely their process and the pace that feels good to them. And I would liken that to the traditional psychotherapy, talk therapy. You're meeting with a therapist once a week. They're providing some psychoanalytical reflection, making connections and helping the client increase insight. And then you have the other person who's been there, done that. They've driven to New York multiple times. They said, okay, I've seen all of the scenery. I'm going in a helicopter. And they get to New York much faster. And that's what I consider EMDR. It's a much expedited treatment to get a person to a point where they can really access those unprocessed memories to really receive the ultimate healing they so deserve. It's a very systematic and formatted model. I really like that about this particular therapy model. Thank you for speaking to my intuition and the space that I hold, because that's all a part of being the facilitator and therapist. And today I'll alternate between facilitator and therapist. So I'll use those interchangeably. But, I'm referring to therapist. But it really takes the pressure off the therapist because I'm using this systemic model and I'm really placing the agency back on the person. I'm saying you have everything in you today, right now, that can heal these trauma memories. And I think that's such an empowering exchange. I think sometimes in the psychotherapy dynamic, there can be this power struggle or power dynamic where, the client comes in and it's like, oh, I'm coming to you for the answers. And with EMDR, it's like, hey, you've got the answers. You'll tell me the answers. And so it's a really beautiful process as the facilitator to watch the person go through their story, their life story, and bring up these trapped memories that get unblocked and processed through and desensitized.
Yeah, well, one thing I'm really curious about is like, can you just maybe in a short way surmise essentially what happens? And Lacy kind of spoke to this before, but like what happens when there's a traumatic experience, like something like PTSD, and help people understand that when we experience trauma, there's so many ways that we're not fully processing it. And this model helps us really integrate it on both sides of the hemisphere of the brain in order to be fully processed through.
Absolutely. And I love talking about the neurobiology of trauma. And when I share the neurobiology of trauma and the impact it has on a person's brain, I've done presentations to college classes, and I could see the light bulb go off in the audience. I could see the students going, oh my God, what I experienced was trauma. And so it's important to note that not all traumatic experiences are going to result in a post-traumatic stress disorder experience or disorder. And what I perceive as trauma, or let's say a perceived threat, you may not find threatening. And so it does become subjective as we get older in our life. And so if we go back to our formidable years, 0 to, let's say, 12, if we are exposed to a threatening situation that puts our body in a state of fear and danger, it elicits that state. Well, the amygdala in our brain, which lies in the limbic system, that's our alarm. That's going to sense danger. And that's really our reptilian brain. That's going to sound, it's going to say, you need to get out of here. You're now in primal survival mode. And as the amygdala alarms itself, the hippocampus, which is responsible for learning and storing memories, that's going to release cortisol. And cortisol is a hormone for a person to not feel the pain they're enduring or experiencing. And so that's going to really put you into this adrenaline state of fight, flight, or freeze. And a person's not able to access their prefrontal cortex. They're not able to reason. They're not able to use those executive functioning parts of the brain that can make sense of what is happening to them. And so as the amygdala sound, a person does one of three things. They try to leave the situation. They try to fight the situation. But more often than not, and we're learning this through research, a person freezes. And the reason they freeze is because whatever they're experiencing typically resembles something familiar. And what I mean by that is they may be familiar with their environment. So why would they want to leave the environment if it's their home? They may know the person that is perpetrating this violation onto them. And so why would they want to fight this person that is a family member or someone they do care about that is now causing them harm? And so it becomes extremely confusing for the person. And going back to the hippocampus and what the hippocampus does for our brain, typically the hippocampus can store memories in a very chronological manner. And so, for instance, a person, let's say, who's not experiencing trauma, gets up in the morning, puts on their robe, they go outside, they pick up their newspaper, waves to their neighbor, and goes inside, makes her, cup of coffee, drinks her cup of coffee, opens the newspaper, and starts reading the newspaper. Now, if someone asked that person, what did you do first thing in the morning? They would be able to recall chronologically, step by step, what they did. Now, because the hippocampus during a traumatic experience releases that cortisol, it shuts off. It's no longer able to store that experience in a chronologic, systematic manner. And so this has become problematic in the past with trauma survivors who would go make a police report after being sexually assaulted. And so I worked on a college campus as the sexual assault survivors advocate, and I would accompany the survivor to the police station, and we would meet with the detective, and the detective would question the survivor. And they would feel a bit frustrated, being that they're very linear and they want to be able to gather a statement from the survivor. But what they were starting to notice is that it was very fragmented. So the survivor would recall certain things about the room or certain smells, but they couldn't recall, like, well, what'd you do first? And so I was there as their advocate and as a trauma-informed licensed marriage family therapist to say, hey, I think we need to understand really what happens to the brain when a person is experiencing a perceived threat or a threatening experience. And so I got to do a lot of education on the college campus and teach the police officers who were so open and willing to adjust their interview process and to learn what was happening to these survivors' brains so that they could be of assistance, because they really had their hearts in the right place and they wanted to help the survivors. They just didn't know how to go about it. So then what happens after the trauma experience ends, right? And this person now, depending on their childhood experiences, depending on all of the experiences that has preceded this one that they went through, this is going to determine how quickly they return to their baseline functioning and they're able to self-regulate and self-soothe and get back into their parasympathetic state, which is known as the rest and digest state. This is where you feel good. You're able to return to that prefrontal cortex. You're able to start reasoning and making sense of what happened. And this is when I said earlier, not all trauma is going to equal a post-traumatic stress disorder. That's because the children who had a very safe, predictable environment growing up, who had nurture and self-regulation with their parents, they were attended to. When they cried, someone came and held them and asked them, what's going on? You okay? I believe that you can tell me what's going on. I want to know. I trust you. You trust me. There's this mirroring that goes on.
The attunement, right?
Exactly. This child starts to really believe in, their ability to self-soothe themselves. And so those folks that were so fortunate to have that type of upbringing that was very stable and predictable and safe, they're able to kind of bounce back from traumatic experiences and adapt much quicker. And the children who lived in a household where there was chronic substance use, there was domestic violence, there was shouting, there was throwing of objects and loud crashes, there was no food, there was absence. The parents weren't there. The child's crying and no one's coming to tend to their needs. Those children never had the opportunity to learn what it felt like to self-regulate with their caregiver. And so when they go through a traumatic experience, they're living from that same state of fight or flight because they were experiencing fight or flight at such a young age. The one thing that I want listeners to know is you can learn how to self-regulate. You can learn how to self-soothe. And that's what's so great about the EMDR is, one of the phases is just dedicated to resourcing and coping skills. It's what do you utilize when you feel dysregulated? What do you utilize when you're in a state of distress? And a lot of times clients don't know, or they know the answer, but they don't actively put it into practice because it feels uncomfortable. And so we'll stay working on resourcing for quite some time before we actually move into the desensitizing and reprocessing phase, because there is no way I'm going to start doing the bilateral stimulation with the client, bring up a traumatic memory, and let the client just be left to their own devices. That is not okay, with me. And so I say 8 phases. It is 8 phases, but The length of the therapy is just all going to be dependent on where the client's at when we meet. So I hope that gave a good understanding of kind of what happens to the brain. If a person is continually living through trauma throughout their life, the hippocampus actually tends to shrink. I have some clients who say to me, Katie, I have a whole block of my life that I can't remember.
Ooh, let's dig into that a little.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big one that comes up in this work a lot. A lot of people will say, and obviously I know that you don't do hypnosis, but a lot of people will say, I'm down there and I can't remember anything or nothing's coming up. And I'm sure that happens in EMDR as well. In a nutshell, what's going on there?
Well, and so because the cortisol is constantly being released, the memories it's almost like they're splattered in the brain. And so they're in there. They're just not filed in that chronological way I was explaining. I don't like to use the word healthy, but like a healthy person's brain who hasn't experienced trauma ongoingly, they're going to be able to file in like a little filing category. They're going to be able to put those memories in there. A trauma is a perceived threat. And what I mean by perceived threat is if a person has experienced complex trauma, which means you've experienced numerous trauma situations over and over again, they've been compounded, you are living from a state of fight or flight. That is your baseline. And so you're rarely experiencing what it's like to be in the parasympathetic nervous system. And so a trigger can be anything from a scent, a smell of cologne. And so when a person feels triggered or is triggered, they are flooded with all of those somatic feelings. So it's all of the physiological effects from the trauma. But again, they can't make sense. They can't go, well, it's because of this, because those memories are unaccessible at this time. And that's what's so important with like the DI work and the EMDR is we're saying, okay, let's target this memory that you know has happened or think may have happened. Let's target that and let's mindfully bring that up. Let's give it permission to come up. And a lot of times it takes quite some time. It takes numerous sessions because it's so far blocked and you're so disconnected.
One thing I just want to bring it back to what you said earlier, Katie, just to sort of break it down. And this is kind of what we do. And they explained is like, we get all the insights and we're like, okay, what's the core points from it? So what I'm hearing you say with the trauma is that essentially when someone faces a traumatic experience, they can either have the tools to self-regulate and be resilient based off of attunement to a parent, or they might not have those tools. And if they don't have those tools, then they are going to be in a state of fight or flight. They might not be able to process it fully, and it's going to get stuck in the brain. And the cool thing is that regardless if you had the attunement or you didn't have the attunement, you can start to learn the tools to become resilient, to self-regulate, to soothe. And once you have those tools, then you can go back into the trauma through something like EMDR and start processing and pulling out that really scary, painful experience and start to feel your feelings on it once you have those sort of resilient tools built in.
Exactly, Jessica. And it's so important to know that trauma is not a life sentence. It is possible to heal from trauma, and you do not need to be governed by your trauma responses, and you do not need to think that this is how you're going to live the rest of your life because, in a sense, you are trapped. You are trapped by the triggers. You are constantly feeling flooded, hyper aroused, on edge, and you're in survival mode your whole life. So if a person feels ready and so inclined, getting help is necessary to work through these old trauma memories because they are extremely painful and it's very, very scary work. So any person that decides they're ready to address what's happened in their past, I want you to know you are extremely brave and you're extremely courageous to take that step because it is not easy at all. Another thing that happens in trauma is disassociation. And so a person just is completely removed from their body when they're experiencing the trauma. So disassociation is a coping mechanism that helps a person not feel the pain in real time.
I know Jessica and I are like, wow, we want to, there's so much to break down here. But that's what a lot of ketamine therapy is used for these days, is to help. Or no, is it to see perspective from outside of yourself?
Well, ketamine therapy is used to help a person. It's the same thing as MDMA. I mean, they all have kind of their specifics, right? MDMA allows a person to, if they've never experienced love by their caregiver or growing up, there was such a detachment from a healthy attachment from their caregiver, they're able to finally experience love and see themselves as a loving person. Ketamine, they talk a lot about ego deaths. So that can happen during ketamine journeys. Psilocybin can really cut through the subconscious, and we'll go into that later. And, LSD can really just break everything down, break all of the materialism down and deconstructs that for you. And you all of a sudden see what's really important and how connected you are to everything. And so they all have their specific compounds and properties that target trauma, and they're all extremely effective. Ketamine, a person who has been sexually assaulted over and over again and has maybe developed their own sex addiction or just a different pattern to sex, they are addicted to porn, and that's the only way they can feel sexually stimulated because that's safe to them, because they don't want to have a relationship with another person because that's unsafe. A person who does ketamine will actually maybe start masturbating to get in touch with who they are sexually in a safe way. That's definitely happened in the past.
And connected with their body.
Exactly. And knowing okay, I'm not disgusting. There's this kind of rebirth that happens, if you will, in those journeys. And those are, of course, high doses. Those aren't microdoses. So I don't want to confuse the listeners. You're not going to be masturbating if you're microdosing. If you were sexually assaulted in the past, that's not going to happen. Those are specific journeys that are facilitated by a sitter or an integrator that helps you through that whole process and is trained in the higher dose psychedelic experiences.
And I just want to make the disclaimer, all of these tools or drugs or anything that we're suggesting, obviously you should do this alongside a practitioner. We're not suggesting you go out and get ketamine off the street and start self-facilitating. This is definitely something that you want to do with a therapist, a licensed practitioner. There's so many trials going on right now through all of these different modalities, but I think it's really cool and unique that people are starting to look at other ways we can start to calm different things in the brain and access deeper ways of healing.
One thing that out of just an energetic piece, because I think we have many of these people in our community, one thing I heard you say that I think is really important, because we've talked about really heavy traumas as examples, but you say it's a perceived threat. And what I was alluding to is I think we have so many extrasensory, very sensitive beings that are always coming into the world, but certainly I know many of them. I am one of them. So let's say if I take my trauma, much of it is from being a highly sensitive individual who wasn't seen or didn't feel safe. And it wasn't that I was in unsafe environments. I wasn't having that attunement. And so I think many listeners can also identify with that. If we talk about trauma from a sensitive perspective, somebody who wasn't abused, or, abuse comes in many different forms, maybe verbal, mental, etc. But they could look and go, I had the perfect childhood. I talk a lot about how we're such individual beings. It's, we've all experienced some form of shame and pain. And that's why in the trifecta of this manifestation process, you unblock, you expand, and you take aligned action. That's where manifestation happens. Let's talk a little bit about that. Somebody who says, I've had the perfect childhood. How is EMDR or any of these modalities, how is that effective if they're not seeing what they want coming into their life, because we know that there are some subconscious blocks going on there?
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up, because I don't want a person to start thinking that EMDR is only effective for complex trauma or for situations that caused bodily harm. Or, it's like back in the day, trauma was veterans or Army soldiers coming back and veterans to the Army. And that's what PTSD was defined as. And, if a person went through a natural disaster, it was, that was very traumatizing. But what about everything else? What about just not being seen or heard in your family? What about getting lost in the sibling shuffle, right? The birth order. It's like, oh, I'm the middle child. Like you said, Lacy, like I was cared for. I was in extracurricular activities. My parents were married. They stayed married. They provided for me, in all ways. We went on vacations, but I never felt acknowledged. That could be perceived as traumatizing. So trauma is subjective. And it doesn't have to equate to this horrific experience. Another thing to point out with EMDR is I sometimes, if a client comes and says, okay, we did a lot of desensitizing and reprocessing last week, I'm pretty spent, I want to do just a talk therapy session. I'm like, okay, you know yourself the best. Great, let's do it. But maybe let's do some installation. And that's a part of one of the phases, and we'll get into that. But positive installation is something that everyone can use, and that is rewriting the story. How do you want to feel about yourself today based off of the belief that was constructed from your childhood? So perhaps the belief that was developed with a child that was never seen in their family, it was, I'm not important. And so you navigate through life mediocre, feeling like you really aren't worth much, right? And so you're not tapping into your full potential. You're not reaching what your authentic code could be, and things aren't coming to you how they should because you're kind of dimming your own light. And as we become adults, it's our responsibility to say, okay, this is a pattern of mine. This is something I actually don't agree with anymore. I am important. I'm bright and I shine bright, and people notice that in me, but I don't notice that. And so they're a perfect candidate to come to EMDR and just say, I had everything great except for I never was noticed in my family. And so I find partners who don't notice me, narcissistic partners who seem to need me to take, care of them or to always compliment them. And that's just the ongoing pattern, right? And so we can change that subconscious belief to, I am somebody, I am worth something, I'm important. I did a session with a client last week where we didn't have an experience in the past that we were desensitizing and reprocessing. She had a really big test coming up, but she had tons of anxiety around whether or not she was going to pass. And so it was like, okay, let's take that feeling. That anxious feeling is connected to something in the past. We don't necessarily need to target that past memory, but we're going to take that anxious feeling and we're going to move that through your system. We're going to move it through the subconscious and through your body so that you are cleared, so that when you go to that test, you sit down and you feel, because her future template, her positive statement that she wanted to install was, I'm relaxed, I'm calm, I'm prepared. And so we were able to do that, which is so interesting. After the session, we had one more session prior to her test, and she said, I think about the test and I'm like feeling calm, like it's amazing. And I'm like, okay, good. I'm like, great, like you're going to go pass. And she passed. It's not necessarily about having these very horrific experiences. It could be subtle experiences in your childhood that has developed a negative belief about yourself.
So I'm quickly interrupting this episode to invite you, if you're ready to start your manifestation journey, or if anything you've heard in our manifestation episodes has piqued your interest to begin. We have a la carte workshops in everything from the basics bundle, which is what we recommend to everyone who starts. It's the formula that actually teaches you how to manifest, unblocked inner child, and unblocked shadow. We also have a la carte workshops on love and money. But the real gem is the Pathway membership because it encompasses every single workshop we have. It's a year-long membership with full access to the few a la carte offerings we have and exclusive workshops not available anywhere else, such as the daily practice, which is what everybody in the pathway uses, hopefully at least 3 times a week to daily, in order to truly create the new neural pathways that one needs in order to manifest, and houses the library of our deep imaginings, which is our unique hypnosis process that allows you to get into your subconscious and overwrite those old neural pathways, creating the new ones. You can use our special code, EXPANDED, all caps, EXPANDED, to receive $20 off your first a la carte workshop purchase or $20 off your first month of the pathway. Again, that's all caps, EXPANDED, EXPANDED. Okay, now back to the episode. One thing I love, how I get to come to you and, I think these days a lot less time to really focus on doing the subconscious work. So it's like having this standing appointment once a week, I'm like, cool, we're going to clear out so many cobwebs, especially when I was microdosing at the same time, which I'm about to start picking back up again and incorporating DIs. So the one thing that I really love in what you were saying is if we really look at the basis of this work, it's getting back into your whole worthy self. That's your self-worth. And what I love about the combination of EMDR with this work, like I said, you can target those experiences or those feelings or those memories. And then once you do all of the spider webbing through those different 8 phases, and at the end, you have this positive statement and you've actually felt the positive feelings. We had a breakthrough recently where I was really addressing this trigger that was coming up around Christmas about feeling really inadequate, especially in comparison to another person. So it was my shadow. It was this person who's created a lot of shadow for me. They have not. It's just when I see them, they're such a direct mirror of my shadow, of all of the ways that I felt inadequate growing up. And we worked through a really powerful EMDR session, and I was microdosing at that time as well. And at the end, it was such a breakthrough for me in that positive statement. I mean, it was so powerful. The way that I felt leaving that session, I felt like, oh my gosh, the way I felt with my closest best friend that I could share anything with in childhood, I could now feel about this person who mirrored me after that EMDR session. And then it's so wild. The next time I ended up connecting with this person that mirrors and triggers me, we were on such a different energetic playing field together. And it was such a direct testament to this work, getting into your worth, getting into your self-worth, and really recreating those neural pathways, repatterning and rewriting them. And so what I love about this piece, even though in that session, I wasn't focusing on like deep traumas of any kind. It was actually really messaging growing up, like you were saying, a reflection of feeling not good enough in comparison to other people I grew up around. Just in that one session, it was dealing with a lot of my sensitivities and then really being able to get into a closer version of my whole worthy self, which has shown up in tremendous ways in my manifestation practice. A lot of really beautiful up-leveling's been happening. And so that's why I find it to be really, really powerful. And Jessica, I'll let you ask questions because you've never had an EMDR session, right?
No, I've never had one. I did want to kind of understand a little bit more. So I know in our deep imaginings, we have binaural beats in the background. So it's music that's oscillating from ear to ear. It's at different frequencies. So you have that other attunement, and that really helps people drop in deeper. And in the DIs, we have a sentiment called reprogramming. I'm sure everyone's aware at this point, but that is where you sort of get that healing, you implant that new memory, you enforce that new idea. So is EMDR essentially that expedited in a more, I guess, visceral process because you have either panels or audio or like a light bar to process it from each hemisphere even deeper?
Yeah, so I'll kind of get into the breakdown of what EMDR looks like in a session. And the key component to EMDR is bilateral stimulation. So without bilateral stimulation, EMDR is not what it would be. And the bilateral stimulation can be either through visual. So a person could, if we're doing in-person sessions, you're following my finger. or a light bar. There's an audio that you can play and have them put on earphones, and it would be left, right, beeping, or whatever sound that the client chooses they want to hear. And then there's the tactile. And so this would be you're either holding tappers in your hand, or if we're doing telehealth, I have the client tap on their thighs in a bilateral stimulating manner. And I also have an audio, and I have them follow a dot. So I like to kind of bring all three senses in, because we're all different learners. And so, if one person's more of an audio learner or one person's more of a visual learner, it's like, let's cover all bases. So what the bilateral stimulation is doing is it's activating both the right and left side of the brain. And so if we got to go back to what happens in a trauma experience, is those memories that are kind of splattered and not filed in that hippocampus, that they're stuck in the right side of the brain. And so the first thing we do in the 8 phases, we gather history. It's like, okay, we're going to assess the client's readiness, and we're going to see what is it that you've dealt with throughout your life. So it's data collecting. The second phase is preparation. I'm checking in with the client. What do you do outside of the therapy setting? Like, we may do breathing techniques in therapy to help calm the client down if they're presenting as anxious. But what do you do on your own? What's your toolbox look like? What are the coping skills? EMDR comes with a few resources. It's called Safe Space and Container. And so I offer those to the clients. I walk them through it. Safe Space is them really picking a place that was safe, or they can create a fictional safe space that they want to go to when they start feeling distressed in their life. And so it's learning how to control that mechanism of, oh, I'm feeling triggered, I'm actually going to go to my safe space. After that second phase, the third phase is, what target memory and situation are we going to start desensitizing? And this is an evidence-based model. And what I mean by that is there is scientific data showing the efficacy of the benefits of this model. And how we know that is that I scale the client's distress that's related to the target memory. And so it's called subject unit of distress. And I'll say, hey, Lacy, how distressing is that memory to you when you think about it on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being most distressing? And the goal is, if she says an 8, that during our session, we clear through the cobwebs enough that it comes down to at least a 3, 2, 1, or 0. And at that point, we can kind of move into the installation phase. Some memories are so saturated and so impactful, and there's so many kind of clusters attached to a particular memory, that it's going to take multiple sessions to get that client down to a 3, 2, 1, or 0. And so we just kind of consider that to be an incomplete session. It doesn't mean that it's bad or they didn't do well. It just means, all right, we got some more work to do. No big deal. And so, like, throughout the desensitizing and reprocessing, I'll check in with the client and say, okay, think about the original memory that we're targeting today. How distressing does that feel on a scale of 0 to 10? And then they'll give me feedback, and then we'll just go from there and, hopefully just keep going lower and lower on that distress scale. I'll ask the client, with a target memory, there's always a negative belief that was born out of that target memory. So this happened to me. Now I believe this in my current state. So presently I feel this as a result of that. Our goal is to change that current negative belief. So I ask them, okay, then what would you rather believe about yourself? And so they give me a positive statement, which is always hard. It's interesting. It seems to be pretty consistent. It's like, I don't know. They're like, the positive statement, I don't know, and I don't feel connected to it. And I'll just say, get something out. I'll put it on paper. And what organically happens is, as the desensitizing and reprocessing happens, the positive statement emerges. And it's such a cool process to see, because they'll say, I'm good enough. And then all of a sudden it changes to, no, actually, I need to know that I'm safe, because then I feel I'm good enough. So that happens, like, 9 out of 10 times. And then I'll have the client rate that. It's called validity of cognition. So how valid does that positive statement really feel to you? And that's on a scale of 1 to 7, and that's always low. It's usually, it's not too true. And what's interesting is that a person logically knows it's supposed to be true. So sometimes they'll give me a high rating. They'll be like, it's a 6. And I'm like, oh, really? I'm like, well, okay, that's interesting. Then I'll say, take the logic out and close your eyes, start tuning into your breath. And I want you to scan your body. And I want you to start saying that positive statement. And I want you to tell me how your body's responding. And how true does that statement now feel to you when you're really tapping into your body's feedback? And they'll say, oh God, my body's telling me it's more like a 3. And so that's interesting because trauma stores in the body. The brain can shut things off and compartmentalize and kind of put things into dormant areas and say, oh, that didn't happen. And Bessel van der Kolk, he's a psychiatrist. He's known for his research on PTSD. He has a fabulous book, if anyone's interested. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. And it talks all about how your body is experiencing the effects from a traumatic experience ongoingly. Tension, tightness, ulcers, headaches, not being able to take deep breaths. You're just a very shallow breather. These all can be symptoms from a traumatic experience. So after phase 3, we go into phase 4, and that's the work. We start doing the bilateral stimulation. And I start really holding a space for the client because I know that they're about to get down to the nitty-gritty. And the desensitizing and the reprocessing happens. I start scaling the distress. I ask them, how distressed are you feeling on a scale of 1 to 10? Another thing that's really interesting about this particular phase of the process is clients feel as if they have a memory come through and it's not related to the target memory. They feel it's irrelevant to share. And so I've started to learn that anything that comes through, any memory that pops up is extremely important to share in our experience because that memory somehow, some way is connected and or blocking our target memory that we're trying to get to. So we need to access that memory first and clear that out to get to what we are trying to reprocess.
That's fascinating because I think even with the DI work too, people will be like, well, I'm really trying to get to this, root block of not feeling good enough looks wise, let's say. And then they have this other memory come up and they're like, it has nothing to do with it, but like I can't really get to reprogram it. And so you're saying that still hold on to whatever has come up because it's intuitively guiding you in the right direction. It's just something you may need to look at ahead of time.
Absolutely. Because memories are connections. They're, I kind of describe it as like when you're young, you have this really short little tree trunk. As you go through experiences in your life, your tree trunk grows and so do branches. And so if you think of trauma, well, the branches are growing and new branches are growing and it's one trauma memory after another trauma memory and they may all be clustered together. And so when a person experiences a feeling in their present moment, that's going to bring them back to that old rooted tree branch. And that's what sometimes is so confusing. You're like, I'm playing out this old pattern, this old behavior. I'm aware that I'm doing it, but I have no control over it. Well, that's because it's still rooted and connected to that tree branch going back to 12 years old when you were told by your teacher you're not smart. You may be presented, with your boss telling you, your project wasn't up to par or, they didn't approve it or didn't like it. And all of a sudden you're responding like a 12-year-old because that memory network is still connected. If it's coming from left field and you're like, wait, we're talking about me not doing well in this project at work, but I'm just remembering when I was 12 years old, my math teacher told me I was stupid. Well, that needs to be cleared first before we can work on the boss telling you that she, didn't like your project that you submitted.
And even in the reprogramming terms, it's like journaling can probably help loosen some of this stuff. And then once you go in, you can start having the memories come up and then start reprogramming those on top of it.
Yeah, like how I sort of see based on now, doing the EMDR process and kind of understanding deeper those steps in conjunction, it's really like getting in touch with who your authentic self, like your soul self, your happy, your integrated self. And when you're down there reprogramming, accessing that, like when it says find a healing now, or connecting with that, and also journaling, how did that feel as that version of you? Because correct me if I'm wrong, Katie, but during the process of EMDR, what I find so beneficial is I think it's so orchestrated perfectly, because you find the memory or you pull up the feeling and then it spider webs. Your brain naturally goes, well, wait, what about this time that feels like it's connected to that? And this time, and so you're doing the bilateral, you're going between the two hemispheres and you're actually processing the stored trauma in your body and releasing it and giving your brain a chance, instead of freezing, that trauma, to actually like let it flow. And so once you go through all of that, similar in the DI, you're like going through and pulling up the memory and you're processing the experience. Then what I love about the positive statement at the end and doing the integration at the end, your brain naturally in the process starts to go to the healing. When it feels like it's been a very complete session for me, the brain starts to open up to the possibility of the positive and the healing. And to me, I know at the end of that it's going to trickle all over into my world. Like I get so giddy when like we've hit it and we've hit the whole process all the way through, because I'm like, shit, now I know in manifestation how this is going to present. May I start to see some tests? May I start to see some micro manifestations come through? It's like, it's so rewarding. So just to kind of surmise that, correct me if I'm wrong, in the process of DI work, it's really starting to understand your authentic self. You're going through the DI, especially the reprogramming ones, and you're bringing up, the subconscious is bringing forward the targeted memories, the things connected. And when you're reprogramming those, starting to work with that authentic, whole, worthy self, that higher self, and then journaling about it after.
Yes, and the brain is capable of healing itself. And so, I hope that offers hope to the listeners, because what happens in the bilateral reprocessing, desensitizing stage is it's taking those memories and it's allowing the left hemisphere of the brain to go, oh, the prefrontal cortex now is activated, and it's going, I'm not at fault. I'm not responsible for this situation. I can relinquish my responsibility that I've held for so long. What's so lovely about it, and this is why I refer to myself as the facilitator when I'm in EMDR, is that I have this really simple script that I say, right? I say, just notice that, go with that. And so what's so wonderful about that is the less I say, the more the brain can heal itself in that client. I get out of the way, the subconscious emerges, and the brain starts healing itself as it goes through that left and right brain. And then afterwards, yes, doing the installation and the journaling. And there's such a lightness and a freeing experience that comes with the complete sessions. And you just kind of feel like you were saying, Lacy, like, oh, I can really tap into who I am. My authenticity is here and now. After we do the desensitizing, we do the installation of the positive and future template. And then I have the client scan their body and see if there's any blocks, see if there's any areas that feel stuck, any areas that feel tight. If there is a situation where a client's giving me feedback that they're still a little bit tense or there's pain or blocked areas, we'll do some more bilateral stimulation. Once the client kind of declares that they feel cleared, we go into talking about what they're going to do afterwards. I refer to this as invisible surgery. So I really want to make sure that the client feels capable of taking good care of themselves, not having a night planned after our session. They're very open and susceptible for new neuro pathways to be laid. And so the groundwork that is laid after a session, it's extremely important that the client continues to repeat their positive cognition because it's their script and that's their new neural network that they're, kind of laying for themselves. And then we just kind of start all over. The eighth phase is reevaluation, talking about the progress made in that session and then figuring out what new target memory to address in the following.
So would you say for someone who just had a session and put in a new belief system, watching something that could be fearful or scary, like a Euphoria or a horror film, might not be suggested the day of doing that new processing?
Not recommended at all, and not even allowing yourself to return to that negative cognition. But, I would be interested, Lacy, after a session, is there even an interest to return to that negative cognition? Or is it just completely gone from you? Or do you find yourself oscillating between oh, there's that negative cognition, but yet here's this positive that we installed?
Yeah, it kind of just depends. And I have so much experience, I feel, in ways with the subconscious now, or in my own experiences and body, that I know when something has been healed, and it's like there still may be some spiderweb memories attached, but I know, especially because I see what the universe starts to present to me after, I get to read my energetics after based on what's showing up. May it be tests, may it be expanders out of nowhere, or micro manifestations, or big ones, or aligned actions I have to take, may it be jumping off cliffs. So I can really tell, based on that, but I can also feel it. So a really interesting one recently we've been dealing with was the way that I will surmise it is feeling like it's not my responsibility, to make other people feel seen, or being in their world, or being in their happiness and joy in order to just connect. We really focused this last time on kind of boundaries. So in our boundary course, it's really interesting because we talk about the energetics of manifestation and boundaries. And a really big piece is if you don't do the subconscious work first, you're just going to come back to the same boundaries, going to represent over and over in your life again. No matter how you voice and state your needs as a boundary, that's just the way it rolls because you haven't healed the part of you in your subconscious that's projecting out, for lack of a better way to put it, the low self-worth behavior. So you'll continue to receive the same way that I say energy, the energetics of it, the same way I say energy in a cup. If a cup is half full, something else has to fill that energy. So if you're projecting a certain thing, may it be your trauma bond or your mirror or whatever, is going to also fill and reflect that back to you, because I believe the universe's intention is to reintegrate you back with your whole worthy self before you experience pain, shame, or anything that created you to no longer have self-worth in whatever category. And that's why we're receiving tests and things like that. So it's really fascinating because after this last session, I went very deep, even beyond our session. You entrusted me because you knew that I was capable of it, of doing an exercise outside of it. And that went tremendously deep, breakthrough levels of healing. And so it's really fascinating because the way prior to doing the EMDR on this subject that I was being triggered, or that I would have a loop going on in my brain of codependency and worried about another person, etc., it's totally turned off at this point. A little thing will come up as a reminder, like my subconscious will be like, wait, aren't we supposed to worry about that person's opinion right now and how they're feeling? And then it's like my new inner child is like, fuck no, that's not my job. As a child, that wasn't my job. So it's like, whoa, I know that shift has happened. And that's why, I feel that EMDR in conjunction with this work and the DIs speeds the process up so quickly. I mean, so profoundly and so quickly, especially for someone like myself who doesn't have as much dedicated time to just do free DIs all day long anymore, which I used to do a lot of. And why I think it, you've stated that it speeds that process up so much is because it's the bilateral stimulation. Whereas when you're able to process from left to right, it just seems like it gets that out of your body a lot quicker, and it lays the pathway of new neural pathways much faster.
Well, I want to share, there's not concrete evidence about this, but they say that it's very similar to REM sleep. So when a person's reaching the REM phase of sleep, the brain processes the day's events and the memories, and that's all being processed from the hippocampus. And so when a person experiences that trauma memory, that's staying in the right side of the brain, and those memories aren't going into the hippocampus in a chronological way. And so when we are facilitating in real time that bilateral stimulation, we're allowing that memory to be reprocessed. They're saying it mimics what happens in REM.
Wow, that's fascinating. 2 questions. Lacy, what was the exercise you did after that took you deeper, if that's helpful to share? And then I'm also curious for the people who may have not had that attunement growing up and are like, okay, I'm definitely going to need to figure out my feelings of safety and resilience before jumping into some of these memories. And obviously, if you have memories that are blocked, you can't remember them, and they're really heavy, consult a therapist, be working with TBM work alongside with a therapist. But what are some just practical ways that people could start building that resilience or feeling of safety on their own? For anyone that maybe doesn't have access to EMDR therapy or is in the middle of trying to find an EMDR therapist to take this work even further, if they're doing the DIs and they have the bilateral stimulation in terms of the audio, is there anything, just a starter that they could do at home that would maybe help them deepen their DI practice?
Number one, it's so simple, and I'll actually let you explain it, but firsthand, I'll explain my experience. The direction that you gave me was to cross my hands over my chest, so my above my heart space, and then do really light back and forth butterfly tapping. In this instance, you gave me my positive statements to continue saying and just drift into what we call, into a theta state, and just keep saying it and allowing the feelings that are going to come up in my brain to go where it's going to go. And then I'll let you take over. And so knowing what I know about our DIs and how similar that is to the process of a DI, where I feel that could be tremendously beneficial in this work is after you've done a DI and you feel like you still have more to process because the DIs are guided, aside from one that's unguided, where it's like, okay, I did the DI, I had the subconscious stuff come up, I got to see the healing that needed to happen, I got to experience that. And I'll let you speak to this, Katie, but I'm going to take either a memory or a saying. To me, the saying felt more like a mantra because it just allowed me to go deeper and deeper into the theta space while doing that very gentle back and forth butterfly tapping on my chest. And it just allowed my subconscious to come forward more and more and feel gentle to keep going through memory after memory and letting myself reprogram in real time and get healings. So that was my experience of it.
Wow. What's butterfly tapping? Just curious. What does that look like?
Yeah, it's just another form of facilitating that tactile movement. And so you're crossing your arms over your chest, and then you're just taking your hands and you're tapping them left, right, left, right. And it's extremely soothing. If any person feels like they're escalating and getting into a state of high intense anxiety, you're welcome to just take your arms over your chest, close your eyes, and just tap left, right, and then you start breathing nice and deep. This is what is like creating attunement. If you think of the crossing your arms over your chest, it's almost like you're holding yourself a little bit, and so I always like to share with clients, give yourself what your mother didn't give to you. Give your inner child that opportunity to be nurtured. Does that mean a hug? Does that mean we need to hold ourselves? And yeah, sometimes like crossing your arms and just kind of squeezing gently on your arms just to kind of give yourself that, like, you're okay. You're doing the best you can. I think what's so powerful with what Lacy did is that it's going back to, she was cracked open. And this is why it's so important to make sure that you're utilizing coping skills literally the minute you are done with EMDR, because there is such an opportunity for deeper healing post session. And so a lot of times a person will have new memories come through, like while they're driving, they'll be like, oh my God, that happened too. Wow. Okay. Well, I'm going to go home and maybe tap my positive cognition in because I'm still cracked open. I'm still able to lay that new neural pathway and change that subconscious belief. And dreams get a lot more intense. And so a lot will come through in their dream state, and they'll have more processing that was not ever capable of being processed because it was so stuck in that right side of the brain.
This is fascinating.
It's so cool. It really is.
Even just those little tips of to start attuned to yourself, hugging yourself, crossing your arms and tapping side to side, figuring out ways you can attune to yourself. This kind of came to me as a ping the other day when I think I was reading The Body Keeps the Score, and in it, the book you had mentioned, and in it, he was saying how the attunement of a parent to a child, you think it could be complete neglect, but it could literally be as simple as the child wants more space and starts crying, and the mother is like, oh, you're crying, let me hug you and smother you, and that they're not attuned in that moment. And so how that can happen so much over time. But figuring out ways you can attune to yourself now, would looking at yourself in the mirror, connecting eye to eye, be any sort of attunement? Would that be helpful?
Most definitely. And, using Louise Hay's work of saying stuff out loud, we really want to get out of our heads and we want to get out of our silent inner voice. And so that silent inner voice is what's really continuing that subconscious belief. And so when you start saying things out loud, you're hearing yourself. It's an audio sense. It's like, oh, that's more believable than me just saying it silently to myself in my head. So that's really powerful to look in the mirror. Another thing, I'm a huge advocate for breathing. Breathing has completely changed my life. So sitting every morning for 5 minutes and placing your hand on your heart, your right hand on your heart, your left hand on your belly, and just taking some nice deep belly chest breaths and exhaling and just really kind of becoming aware of what type of breathing you engage in. Are you a deep breather? Are you a shallow breather? What does breathing feel like? Do you feel constricted? Is this bringing up tension? Are you annoyed? This is all really important feedback, and it's all going to help you get out of this cerebral, logical, like, I need to have the answers. We don't need to have the answers. We can drop into our bodies. I think yoga is another beautiful form of attunement because a lot of people are uncomfortable with their bodies, or there's a huge societal pressure of like, we need to have certain types of bodies. And so like moving your body in yoga, breath to movement, without thinking, that is your engagement. Is my only thought is to breathe and move in this sequenced form. That can help a person even move through trauma. That's very healing in itself without doing EMDR. Meditating, letting yourself sit in stillness, and if you have a thought, all good, let that thought go. But like, get to that moment of where it's just that space in between where there's just that nothingness. When you tap into that nothingness, the knowing happens. And what I mean by that is the connection to your authentic self happens. You're like, oh my God. It moves me to tears. Like, I will have moments where I'm like, this is what living is. This is what's so beautiful. And it's nothingness. I think it's what they say bliss is, and it's so simple. I'm not doing anything besides just letting myself tap into the space between the thoughts and then the other thought. But there's just that moment in between where I'm still. And then I feel connected to my higher self. And that's healing too. These exercises I'm explaining, it's about trusting yourself and it's about feeling safe. And this could bring up a lot for people, like sitting on a mat in stillness. I could maybe hear listeners go, hell no, that's not for me, or even just doing yoga. I really like more exercise, like more high impact exercise. It's okay. Well, what are you avoiding with the slower, more meditative exercises then? Anything you're resisting is probably what you need.
Katie, this was so helpful. I feel like we're going to have you back on again to do a microdosing piece because we covered so much today.
I know. Like, I think we've got to like focus EMDR and microdosing because there's so much in both to dig into.
Yes, because I have so much to share about microdosing.
So stay tuned, everyone. We're going to have a part 2 and really dive into all of the microdosing pieces of it and learning more about that. But I hope this is really expansive for everyone to learn a different modality, to try out a different modality, and to actually put some practical steps into giving yourself that trust and that feeling of safety. Katie, where can everyone find you, connect with you, learn more about your work?
Yeah, you can find me at katielarue.com, and that's where you'll find my website.
Thank you for your time, Katie. So grateful.
Thank you too. This was so much fun.
For our March 5-star winner review, we have Maple5, Maeple5. Maple writes, "A most beautiful message. So I'm not sure how I came upon this podcast. I don't know if I sought it out or if it was recommended to me. Anyway, this podcast is a sign that I needed. I've only listened to a few episodes and re-listened to those over again and again to deeply let the message sink in. Over and over, I'm hearing I'm worth it. I deserve this. My self-love, self-worth, and self-respect has expanded exponentially, and so many beautiful opportunities and doors have opened for me since listening to this podcast. I'm loving the variety of topics and the episodes they offer. There are interviews with personal experiences, expansion on the material, and language to broaden one's perspective of best yet, the science of why and how manifestation works. Regardless of the topic, the episodes provide such a beautiful reminder of self-worth, self-love, and deservingness. Seriously, thank you. I am so excited to listen more." Maple, we are so excited to invite you to be a Pathway member for 1 free year to take your manifestation practice to the next level. And we're really excited to see how being a part of the Pathway up-levels your manifestations even further. So please reach out to hi@tobemagnetic.com or message us on Intercom to claim your membership. We will talk to you all next week. Have a good one, guys.